The Washington Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, or OSPI, is the authority when it comes to public education in our state. They set the education standards for local school districts and administer testing to ensure that students are learning the concepts they're supposed to be taught. In March, OSPI released its 2017 Health and Physical Education Standards for Washington's public schools. The standards include uncontroversial topics like germs, nutrition, and exercise. But this year, OSPI included some new topics that have parents up in arms. Beginning in 2017, Washington will introduce gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation into the elementary school curriculum. Under these outcomes, children will begin learning about gender expression in the kindergarten and first grade. In third grade, students will learn about gender identity, the idea that every individual can choose their gender regardless of their biological sex. Fourth graders, aged 10 and 11, will be taught about different sexual orientations. And by fifth grade, students will be taught how to prevent HIV. While these standards may be shocking, perhaps the worst part is that OSPI adopted these new standards without properly notifying parents. When parents and media raised questions, OSPI hid behind a wall of ill-defined terms. For example, on page 10 of the Health and Physical Education Standards, it clearly says all districts, schools, and educators in Washington state are expected to implement the state learning standards and outcomes for all students. However, when asked, OSPI told parents and reporters that the gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation items were merely recommended best practices, not mandates. They told parents that local school districts get to write their own curriculum, which is true. They just didn't mention that the school districts are required to build their curriculums using OSPI standards. You can liken this to OSPI saying you can buy any colored car you want, as long as it's black. But there has been some progress. Last week, OSPI admitted an inconsistency in their standards document and vowed to make changes to the semantics. But regardless of what changes they may make, the Healthy Youth Act, which was passed by the Washington legislature in 2007, says OSPI can reject any curriculum that is not compatible with the state's sexual education standards. And surprise, the state's sex ed standards require the teaching of gender identity, sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender roles. It is clear that Washington State intends to teach your children about gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, and HIV prevention. Perhaps most troubling, however, is the fact that they appear willing to do it behind your back. Even if the new standards document were only recommended best practices and not mandates, the government is still recommending that taxpayer dollars be used to teach impressionable, elementary-aged children about gender identity and same-sex attraction. Are you okay with that? When asked if it was unreasonable for parents to assume that OSPI could include topics such as gender identity and sexual orientation in their curriculum review, OSPI's communications manager responded, quote, "It's not unreasonable to assume it, but it won't be done." In other words, we can teach them that if we want to, but we won't. Just trust us. Call your legislators and let them know how you feel. You may have never paid attention to the race for the Superintendent of Public Instruction before, but now you have a reason to. Our kids are not a social experiment and they don't belong to the government. This is Zach Freeman for the Family Policy Institute of Washington.